Story, Circle 1. The Time I Was Almost Kidnapped by a Serial Killer. The first story is called The Time I Was Almost Kidnapped by a Serial Killer. Quite a promising opener, isn't it? In February 2012, I went to visit my grandfather's grave on his birthday. His death had been very hard on me. He passed away in March 2011, and the loss still felt raw. I was kneeling beneath the canopy at his grave, head bowed and grieving, when my body suddenly flipped into full danger mode. I looked up and saw a man sprinting flat out from the woods that bordered the cemetery. I forced myself to reach my car as fast as possible so he couldn't get close. When I reached my truck, he was about 15 meters away. I jumped inside and slammed the door, much to his obvious frustration. He threw his hands up like his favorite team had just lost a football game. I started the engine and pulled away as fast as I could, but not before driving right past him. I never took my eyes off him, and he didn't either, so I got a very clear look at his face. A few years later, bored at work, I downloaded an app full of articles about the paranormal, cryptids, serial killers, and UFOs. Browsing the serial killer pieces, I found one that made my heart drop into my stomach. Israel Keyes Best, known for killing a teenage girl in Alaska, dismembering her, and dumping the pieces into a frozen lake, used to stash kill kits in various places long before committing his crimes. After the Alaska incident, he traveled to Texas for a wedding near my hometown and disappeared for a while. His family had no idea where he was. He was arrested in that area, taken to a nearby jail, and later extradited back to Alaska to stand trial. About a year ago, I found a book about him that included many of the details I've mentioned here. He had been killing for years, and no one knows the true number of victims. He ultimately died by suicide in prison. Near the end, the book listed some of his preferred places to abduct people, public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if there was a kit buried somewhere in those woods. You were fast, Israel, but I was faster, and I'm grateful our meeting went no further. Officially, it's just an unimaginably frightening story. I can't imagine how the author felt reading about him, or the relief she must have felt learning he was already in prison and that she'd gotten away. Now, to the comments, she replied to many of them, and there's a lot of interesting detail. That's some terrifying stuff. I've read all about him. He ran out of the woods straight at you? How far were the trees from where you were at the grave? The author replies, right toward me. The woods are pretty far from the grave, but he was already running for a good second before I looked up. He was a couple 100 feet away by then. 100 feet is about 30 meters, so roughly 60-90 meters at best. Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. I can't imagine the feeling. You're alone in a quiet cemetery. You look up, and someone is sprinting toward you from maybe 100 meters away, with clearly bad intentions. Are you kidding me? I'm so glad you're safe. This is unbelievable. I've never gasped so loud as when I read his name in your story. Trust your instincts. They're real, she answers. Reading that book made me so anxious, especially near the end. At one point, he even mentions that some people got away from him. I'm glad I wasn't the only one. According to Wikipedia, his estimated victim count ranges from 3 to 12, and he was caught in 2012, meaning there was a very real chance the author could have been his last victim. Wow, mourning at your grandfather's grave, and then having to run from a serial killer. So glad you looked up when you did. I'd bet your grandpa was watching over you that day. There was one deleted comment after that, and the author wrote, absolutely. I was definitely alone, and I felt like he knew to sit in the woods and wait. It could have been anyone. I just got lucky, and I needed a good sprint that day. I run faster when fear motivates me. It's good she can see some humor in it now. Many commenters also asked whether they searched for any of the kill kits he might have hidden there, or reported it to the police. She replied that a friend went looking because she'll never forget exactly where he emerged from. Unfortunately, several major floods have happened since, so nothing turned up. Asked whether she contacted the police with this information, she said, I didn't, because where I live, crazy things happen all the time. But now that I know they're still searching for kits in places he visited, I intend to do it. I hope that after all this, she found the strength to return to a peaceful life and feel safe again day to day. Because I can't imagine what an experience like that can do to a person. The next story could have ended the same way. Story, Narration. Someone broke into my house and tried to find me. It's called Someone Broke Into My House and Tried to Find Me. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood sat just beyond the suburbs, what felt like the perfect balance of space and nice neighbors, close enough not to feel isolated. There were no streetlights, so nights were very dark, especially when clouds covered the moon. That didn't bother me. On those dark nights, my little house felt even more atmospheric. One winter evening, I was driving home from work. It was overcast, so as I pulled up, I could see only my headlights and the porch light. Stepping out of the car, I caught the smell of cigarette smoke. Odd. I'd never smelled that around the house before, and there was no one nearby. I ignored it and went inside. I just finished a shift with a few hours of overtime and felt wiped out. It wasn't even 7 yet, but I decided to shower and go straight to bed. Sometime later, I woke up certain I'd heard a noise in the house. I didn't panic at first, because a friend sometimes stopped by to use my shower after work, on his way to evening classes. I'd even given him a spare key so he could come in if I wasn't home. He always texted first, though, and I hadn't heard a notification. I reached for the nightstand, grabbed my phone, and checked for a message. The screen and keypad light blinded me. This was back when phones didn't dim automatically in the dark bright enough to use as a flashlight. Squinting, I made out that it was a little after 9, but I still couldn't tell if I had an unread text. I set the phone down and called my friend's name. After a few seconds of silence, I heard heavy footsteps. Someone sprinted across the ground floor. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the closet. As I opened the door and slipped inside, the person was already coming up the stairs. There were 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hall. I was in one of them, a spare room, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were shut, but the bathroom door was slightly ajar. I heard the intruder thunder past my door into the bathroom. Thank God! Those seconds let me push open the attic hatch in my closet ceiling and climb up. I had just started to pull myself through when he ran back out of the bathroom. I barely got onto the attic floor before my bedroom door flew open. Footsteps pounded into the room and stopped. Not seeing me, he darted back into the hall and into the other room, which held only boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and the table where I painted miniatures. I'm guessing he decided anyone hiding would be in the bedroom, because he rushed back to mine and flipped on the light. A moment later, the closet doors were ripped open. I crouched on the attic, about a yard from the opening, ready to shove him back if he started climbing. From my angle, I could see only his legs, filthy blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of rummaging in the closet, he moved away. Then came a loud crash from the room and a shout of frustration and rage. That scream rattled me the most. It sounded exactly like my stepfather when he snapped. He later ended up in a psychiatric hospital for multiple disorders that made him unstable and violent. The man bolted down the stairs. I heard banging, clattering things thrown, furniture knocked over. I stayed put in the attic. I'd left my phone behind when I ran and wasn't sure I could climb down quietly enough. Eventually, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to go down and call the police. The first thing I saw leaving the closet was my bed flipped over. I assume he was trying to find me. That must have been the loud crash after he left the closet. I couldn't find my phone, so I picked up the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them shouting from downstairs. The first floor was a wreck, just as I expected. Chairs overturned, the couch flipped, books, pictures, and knickknacks scattered across the floor. Kitchen cabinets were open, pantry boxes and cans dumped out. As far as I could tell, the only missing item was a knife from the wooden block in my kitchen. The police searched the house top to bottom and found the side door had been pried open with something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along the fence line, plus some foil and an empty pen tube items they said are commonly used to smoke meth. They figured he'd been watching the house for a while. I realized he was probably smoking there when I pulled in. They collected evidence and told me to stay with family or friends that night and get the door fixed ASAP. I chose to stay awake. I shoved a cabinet against the broken door and spent the next few hours cleaning. I kept checking the window with a flashlight, sweeping the fence line where they'd found the butts, and foil saw nothing. The next day, I arranged to have the door repaired and installed motion sensors at the back and sides of the house. I ran a phone line up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened in that house. I lived there another 3 years without incident. As another precaution, I practiced getting out of bed, into the closet, and up into the attic as fast and quietly as possible. I kept up the habit after I moved, only now I use a recess at the back of the closet instead of an attic. I try not to dwell on what might have happened if I'd been slower getting up there, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom first. Personally, this story is almost scarier than the previous one, even though that one involved a serial killer. That incident happened outdoors, and thank goodness the last storyteller reached her car quickly and got away. Here, the writer was inside her own home, a place that feels safe to all of us, and had to hide in the attic for who knows how long. What if he'd fallen asleep in her house and never left? She might have come down and run into him again. Thankfully, she had somewhere relatively safe to wait until he left and the police arrived. Anywhere else in the house, he would have found her, no question. And with a kitchen knife missing, it's chilling to imagine what he had in mind. Now, to the comments. Honestly, this was probably just a guy high on something. I don't mean to minimize it. I just think he wasn't stalking the author or even knew who she was. Sounds like he was hanging around the woods and did it in a psychotic state. Drug-fueled break-ins are common. I agree, and that makes it even scarier. I wouldn't want anyone breaking in, especially someone on meth or whatever. I heard a podcast about a man on crack who broke into a woman's house twice in one night and ended up killing her. He's in prison, and her father writes him letters. He keeps apologizing. So sad. Another commenter, the author replied to this one, "Oh my God, that's terrifying. Smart idea to practice hiding quickly, because in a real situation, I might freeze and forget what to do. Did the police ever share anything about the evidence? Glad you're safe." The author replies, "I never heard back from the police. Honestly, I don't know how much effort they made to lift prints or DNA from what they found. Thanks for your service, I guess." One more comment. "My instincts would have made me dive out a window and break my back. Sadly, I'd probably do that even if I were strategically prepared. Same, I can't imagine what I'd do." I had something similar happen. I managed to stay clear-headed and escape out a second-floor balcony when I was 13. You can make smart choices too. Don't underestimate yourself. It was summer. My parents finally let me sleep in and skip breakfast with them. My mom called around 8:15 like clockwork. I hung up and realized there were more than 2 men in the house. I was wearing a horrible nightgown my grandparents gave me, swore I wouldn't be caught dead in it. I climbed down from the third-floor balcony and made the long, ridiculous trek to the neighbors, who were more than surprised to see me. Poor woman needed a stiff drink that morning. The police arrived and, after a lot of effort, arrested 6 men. Several had knives, 2 had guns. The cops agreed my beagle was a useless guard that morning. He kissed every stranger who walked in. The next story is a little... Story number 3. A Florida woman crawled out of my hotel mirror to rob me. It has a similar vibe to the last story, but it's a bit lighter because there was no real risk of murder. It's called A Florida Woman Crawled Out of My Hotel Mirror to Rob Me. Last Monday, my co-workers and I got back to the hotel after a day working in the field. Rebecca and I headed to our rooms. As I stood at my door and opened it, I saw someone in the bathroom. I said hello. No answer. My first instinct was that it was housekeeping for some reason, until I noticed my bag in her hands. I told my coworker, "There's a woman in my room," then asked the stranger, "What are you doing with my things?" After that, it's a blur. I don't remember exactly what I said or what she said, but she kept muttering that her key still worked, that it still worked, and that's how she got in. I was in shock. She was clearly panicked at being caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and started digging around for her purse. By then, my coworker was behind me, watching this chaos unfold. The woman hurried toward the door with her bag. I asked what was in it, thinking it might be my stuff. She said, No, just my things, only my things. I'll show you." I looked inside and didn't see anything of mine. And because I was obviously still in shock, I let her go. I walked into my room, and it was a mess. I quickly scanned to see if anything was missing. My electronics were all there. Then I checked the bathroom and found my underwear, bikinis, and clothes stuffed haphazardly into my own bags. Even my passport had been shoved in. I looked in the drawer and realized she'd gone through my pills. I don't know what I was thinking except that I wanted them back, so I ran out to find her. I hit the laundry room downstairs and circled the hotel, but didn't see her. Realizing I wasn't going to, my coworker and I went to the lobby to report it and then called the police. That's when I got really scared, thinking she'd taken the medication I actually needed. The police arrived, took our statements, and inspected the room. I noticed pieces of drywall in the sink and mentioned it, but none of us knew where they came from. We checked doors and windows, no signs of forced entry, so we figured she must have had a spare key or something, though the front desk insisted that wasn't possible. After the police left, I sat down to make some calls and kept thinking about the drywall in the sink. It didn't add up. I was on the phone, staring at the drywall, then at the mirror right above it, and suddenly it clicked. I called my coworker back and asked her to help me take the mirror down. We lifted it off the wall, and behind it was a hole big enough for a desperate addict to crawl through. The officers were still in the parking lot, so we flagged them down. They came back, looked inside the cavity, and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothing, toothbrushes. The woman had been living inside the wall behind my mirror. God knows how long. She had access to me and my room whenever she wanted. We packed our things and left immediately. What's even crazier is she'd probably been there for a while. The last time we stayed at that hotel, I thought I smelled cigarette smoke and assumed someone was smoking in the bathroom, and it was drifting through the vents. Nope, she was smoking right on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms, too. The holes in the walls were left from renovations, and the hotel hadn't patched them properly, just covered them with mirrors. She could hang out in people's rooms when they were gone. In any case, it was insane. I'll attach a photo of the hole somewhere here. The story is just crazy. Judging by the author's tone, she can already look back with some humor. Maybe most people would, eventually. But imagine how terrifying it really is, someone living behind your mirror. You're in your room, and there's another person inside the mirror, living there. Yikes. Now for the comments. Try picturing her crawling out of the mirror for a second. It's midnight, and I was about to sleep. Thanks, author. I'm curious how she didn't break the mirror going in and out. This is the wildest thing I've ever read, author. Because of you, I check every hotel mirror now. How did she figure it out? They're finding a literal pile of junk in the walls. How did she get in the first time? Did anything go missing? What on earth? Another commenter replies, I'm guessing she could enter from somewhere outside. The mirrors give her access to different rooms. Once she crawls in, she sets the mirror back, so the author's mirror looked intact. She leaves through the door with what she wants. Maybe she lives there full-time. Maybe she just shows up to steal. Either way. It's terrifying. The author's coworker also chimed in. OP was an absolute detective with that mirror. She noticed drywall crumbs in the sink with no visible damage anywhere. After a while, she burst out of her room with this wild idea, and I helped her take the mirror off the wall, and the rest is history. We think the woman moved to another room afterward, or found a different hole to crawl into and rebuild her little nest. The line of these cavities runs the length of the hotel. The author must be a private eye in another life. I never would have thought to remove the mirror. It's like a mini Shawshank escape route. And that's the last story for today. Story number 4. Why We Don't See Uncle Mark Anymore. It's called Why We Don't See Uncle Mark Anymore. Recently, over a drink, my dad told me the whole story. He'd had a bit to drink and finally confessed, saying it happened a long time ago and he'd already paid the price, so nothing more could happen to him. That's the only reason I'm writing this here. Uncle Mark was my favorite uncle when I was a kid. He always invited me over to show off his airsoft gun collection, play hide-and-seek with my friends, and even took us to the beach. He'd arrive with candy and act like one of us, just another kid who wanted to have fun. Then came the day, when I was 7, that I'd been excited about. We were supposed to go to this amazing place. Dad was happy and upbeat all day, talking about how much he loved that his brother wanted to be part of his kids' lives. Then the phone rang. I was in my room packing when I heard my father scream, a blood-chilling scream. He raged, practically ripped our front door off its hinges, and slammed it so hard a picture on the wall fell. After that, I didn't see him for a long time, and he never told me why, until we finally talked about it later. The explanation comes at the end. Mom had some savings from a small lottery win, so we were fine financially. She kept smiling and telling me Dad had gone away for a short time. When I asked where he was, she said he was taking care of me and my siblings. Uncle Mark also stopped showing up, though we saw him around town a few times. Strangely, he'd run off the moment Mom noticed me waving at him. 9 months later, Dad came home. I ran to him and hugged him tight. He hugged me back. We threw a welcome home party food, cake, all the usual. I was just happy Dad was home. About a week later, Dad sat me and the other kids down and explained that Uncle Mark wouldn't be coming over anymore. When I asked why, he only said Uncle Mark was a bad person, and if he ever tried to talk to us, we should ignore him and find a parent. About a year after that, by then I was 9, I walked out of school to wait for pickup and saw Uncle Mark standing there with a wide smile. I got nervous. He came over and said he'd come to take me for a ride. I told him I wasn't supposed to talk to him. He was a bad person, my dad said so. For a second, his face twisted into something scary. Then he told me it was fine. My parents had changed their minds, and he tried to take my hand. That's when my dad appeared. Dad punched Uncle Mark straight in the face. Even as a kid, I saw the blood fly, and Uncle Mark went down. After that, it's a blur. Mark ran, Dad chased him. A while later, Dad came back, sighed, hugged me, told Mom to take me home, and said he'd see us later. I don't know why, but I knew then I wouldn't see him for a long time. I was right. 5 years. Dad was gone 5 years. Eventually, Mom admitted he'd been in prison for protecting us. We all suspected he'd done something to Uncle Mark. He had. It turned out Uncle Mark really loved children. The day I was supposed to go to his house, my aunt, his wife, called my dad and said she'd found photos of children under their bed. She was scared and didn't know what to do. Mark was big and strong, and as we later learned, abusive. She was afraid to call the police. Dad got furious, stormed their house, kicked in the door, and found Mark screaming at her while she waved the photos through tears. Dad beat Uncle Mark within an inch of his life. As the police arrested Dad, Mark shouted that he'd make him pay. Worst of all, by the time Dad explained why he'd done it, Mark had burned the photos and intimidated his wife into silence. No evidence. Dad was jailed for assault. Still, he made sure my other uncles and older cousins stayed close to protect us if Mark came back. Mark waited until Dad seemed to think we were safe. Then, according to my father, showed up to snatch me from school right under their noses. People didn't believe Dad when he explained who Mark really was. They thought he was just justifying the earlier assault. The police found nothing, and Mark's wife called my dad a liar. Dad had a few prior arrests, so all anyone saw was a nice uncle coming to pick up his nephew. At school, Mark got away because Dad stumbled. But Dad knew where he'd run. He knew Mark would head home to hide and destroy evidence, just like before. He also knew the police would be right behind him after the school incident, so there wasn't much time. The difference was that Dad had a car. Mark was on foot. Dad drove to the house and asked my aunt if she planned to lie again after what Mark had just tried to do. I don't think highly of her for the first time she protected him, but I believe that day she finally grasped what a monster he was. He was ready to do that to her nephew out of petty revenge for being exposed. She said she wouldn't stop Dad this time or save Mark. Dad told her to gather every bit of evidence while he waited for Mark to show. She came back with photos, a lot of them. Then he told her to leave, wait an hour, and call the police. This ends now. When Mark arrived, Dad, waiting behind the garden wall, smashed him into the front door and kept beating him until he died. In the end, Dad said, "You couldn't even see the floor for the blood." Dad was arrested for murder. He didn't resist and only said he wished the police had done the job. When it came out that Mark really was a predator who had tried to abduct me, and when they had to admit they'd let him slip away the first time, the charge was reduced to manslaughter. Dad's lawyer argued he'd gone into a protective rage and intended only to prevent Mark from harming anyone. No one spoke up in Mark's defense. Dad says he doesn't regret what he did, but he does regret not doing it differently because he missed so much of my life. I told him I'll always be proud of him and that I love him. I was shocked it took so long for anyone to tell me who Uncle Mark was. But Dad asked, would it have been better to hear it as a child or now, as a man who can handle the truth? He was right. I couldn't have handled it as a kid. I'm barely handling it now. It's a horrific story. If I'd been on that jury, assuming this was in the U.S., my verdict would have been not guilty. Oops. No idea how it happened. He just slipped and fell onto his face, many times. Jokes aside, I don't think the father is guilty of anything. Maybe I'm radical, but for people like Mark, the death penalty doesn't sound so bad. Now for the comments. He was your dad's brother? Yes. That's part of why Dad was so happy his brother wanted to be involved, and why he was so enraged when he learned who he really was. If we found out one of my brothers was a pedophile, the rest of us would probably do the same. People are complicated, and my brothers and I have butted heads. But this, rock bottom. How can anyone even think of doing that to his brother's kids? Commenters add that, sadly, most child sexual abuse is committed by family members or close friends. Many share their own experiences, victimized by relatives, and say they wished their parents had done what the author's father did. They're proud of him and grateful he acted. Another comment. My dad's uncle worked in a logging camp in the 50s. He heard a child scream, looked into a tent, and saw a man assaulting a small child. He planted an axe right in the guy's skull. The judge ruled it a justified killing and dismissed the charges. Bravo to that judge. I hope the author is living his best, happiest life, that his father and mother are too, and that Uncle Mark is burning in hell and suffering forever. Those are today's stories. A bit creepy, a bit traumatic, uncomfortable in places, but I hope you found them compelling. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment. All the best, and take care of yourselves.